Good evening. The woo was all you had, didn't it? That took everything you had. Great to see you tonight. I'm glad you're here, and what a wonderful time to just gather together. This beautiful time of year, and as they were singing that song, "I need you, I need you." I'm just letting that soak in, because there's something about just being in the presence of God with other believers in the Word that just meets a place in our life that no other place does. And I hope that tonight you can sense God's presence as we open His Word. So we're in James, the 5th chapter. Can you believe it? Finally, the last chapter. And we're going to finish that up, half of it today and half of it next week. So while you're turning to the 5th chapter of James, it's kind of the beginning of Christmas. And we have enough where we can just kind of talk today. So here's our microphone guy. Look at, he's all fired up. Good to see you. So while you're kind of getting in the Christmas spirit, and this will actually, I promise you, this will actually make sense. It might make sense later on. Think about your favorite. Well, it didn't even have to be a Christmas movie that you really like, or that is at least on your mind, that you have recognition of a person who's kind of a bad guy, kind of a villain in the Christmas movie. So you would say, my favorite movie is da-da-da, and the villain is so-and-so. Are you tracking with me? Does that make sense? Is it Ernesto? Is that your name? Bring your microphone. Pick up your microphone and walk. That's a couple movies. Christmas movies with a villain, or at least somebody that's purported to be kind of not a good guy. Have you ever seen a Christmas movie? Home Alone. Okay, who's the bad guy in Home Alone? Joe. Okay, there's a couple of them, aren't there? And they're robbing the home. All right. I'm sorry. Grinch. Grinch. Who's the villain in Grinch? Why is he a villain? That precious green-looking thing. You remember why he's a villain? His heart's too small. His heart just shrinks to nothing, and he's mean and jealous and envious and all that kind of thing until his heart expands. Another one. Wonderful Life. Who's the villain in The Wonderful Life? Potter. Why is he a villain? Oh. All right. Is it George Bailey? That's Jimmy Stewart, George Bailey? Needs a loan, and he won't even help him during a crisis time. One more. The most famous villain. Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge. Why is he a villain? Greedy, miser, holds on to everything, doesn't let it go. Ebenezer Scrooge. What is the famous little line that he uses that we now repeat? Bah humbug. Do you know that's only mentioned twice in the whole movie? Bah humbug. But we have just purported that thing on and on and on and on. Scrooge is there. Okay, so remember some of those guys' names as we go into the 5th chapter of James, verse 1. Now listen, you rich people. Now, how many of you are going like, okay, this is irrelevant for me. I'm checking out. Okay, you listen up, you rich people. Weep and wail. Before you completely push it off to the side, let me just kind of help identify some categories of people in this world. There are people that are poor without and poor within. So they don't have anything economically. They're poor without, and they're poor within. They don't know God, and they don't care to know God, and they don't even maybe know that they don't know God. They're poor without. There's no spiritual richness in them either. So poor without, poor within. Then there are those who are rich without and rich within. They have a lot of resources or money or things, and they know God. They have a deep, deep faith in God. In fact, the Bible mentions a few of those kind of guys. Can you, in your memory, put anybody in that category? They're rich outside, they're rich inside. David would be one, yeah. Arguably the richest guy in all the Old Testament. Solomon is arguably one. There's one that's probably even richer, they think, at one time. Then he lost it all. Job had a good job, so he's very rich man, probably one of the richest. Another guy, Abraham, arguably, probably between Job and Abraham, some of the richest. How about the New Testament? Joseph of Arimathea was able to let Christ, for just a few days, use his tomb. Somebody else? You can think of anybody else in the New Testament? One you may not realize in Acts, Barnabas. Barnabas he gave a bunch of property to the Lydia. Let's don't leave it all on men. Lydia in the New Testament was probably rich without and rich within. So there's poor without, poor within, rich without, rich within, and then there's poor without and rich within. May not have very much, but you know God. You love Jesus. You have a deep faith. And most of us are thinking, that's me. Sign me up on that one, because we think rich is anybody, above us on the food chain, but we're still, we're poor. And really poor is a relative term. If you go anywhere in the world, there's very few places you could go that somewhere along the line they're not going to look at us and say, nah, I'd put you in the category of rich. You have fresh water, you have a roof over your head, you have clean clothes, you have food to eat. You go home now, it's going to be cold, you just turn on your heater and it's, blowing air. No, you're rich. In fact, you could go back to the richest people in history and they would look at us and go, that's better than we ever had. Our castles didn't look like your houses. We didn't have what you had. So most of us would say we're poor without, rich within, but that's American standards when we would say poor. World standards, we're probably all rich. The last category is the ones that I think he's writing to. These are the ones that are rich without and poor within. They've got everything, they just don't have God. And in fact, in the early Testament church, in this situation with the church that James is writing to, the difference between rich and poor is a huge chasm. There's no middle ground. Very few middle income people. It's either you're rich or you're poor. And most of the Christians were on the poor side and exploited by the rich people. In fact, early in James deals with, why are you giving rich people the best seat in the house? They're the ones that exploit you. So he's going through this whole thing, and he just calls out, now listen, you rich people. We ended the 4th chapter with people who were planning ahead, but without God. Nothing wrong with planning, just don't plan without God, without recognition of God. Now, you rich people, he's saying, there's nothing wrong with riches. It's not like poor people go to heaven and rich people go to hell. But you who spend your money without considering God, you who accumulate your money, your riches, who have all these resources with no recognition of who God is, that's who I'm addressing, James says. And he says to them, weep and wail. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming upon you. Yikes. We would love for rich people to hear that, but when we might be in that, it's like, weep and wail. What in the world's going on? It's a rebuke that he's giving, probably not to Christians. Usually when he's talking to the church, he says brothers and sisters. But when he's dealing with the non-believers, he'll call them out. Here in this case, probably the rich people were not necessarily believers. And He lets them have it. What I love about James, we talked a little bit about last week, he has such a great knowledge of the Old Testament. And he goes into, it's kind of a wisdom literature that James is about it. So it's a lot of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Psalms. And then every now and again, and we're going to see it in this 5th chapter quite a bit, he just kind of tags on to his brother Jesus. He never name drops like I would. If I was James, I'd be like, yeah, when Jesus and I were in 8th grade, we were at the, and Jesus, by the way, his favorite food, I'd throw that in. You never see him do it. The only time he refers to Jesus is Lord. But he's always connecting, sometimes very subtly, into the words of Jesus in the New Testament. When Jesus taught, we're going to see that in a little bit. But here, for just a moment, it's not the wisdom literature, it's not the Jesus words, it's like an Old Testament prophet. He is just, boom, take this. Bang, just nails them right between the eyes. Doesn't care what they think, doesn't care what they do. Just, boom, take this. Weep and wail, he says. Just weep and wail because misery's on its way. Why would he rebuke them? What's the rebuke all about? Let's look in verse 3. Verse 2, he says this. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. Why rebuke them? First of all, he would say, I'm rebuking you because you're guilty of hoarding. Of hoarding. You hang on to something. In those days, much like today, not much different, there are like 3 categories that people would flaunt their riches. Food, the food they ate, the clothes they wore, and then their metal, either the money that they had or the jewelry that they wore. In fact, usually they would say if you were walking down a city in a temple area, market area, you could tell the rich people real quick by what they wore. And James is saying to them, yeah, what you wear, what you eat, all your bling, all your money, if you hang on to it, let me just tell you what time does to it. If you hoard it, it rots, it gets eaten up by moths, it gets corroded. Now, who does that sound like when he's saying that? Does that ring a bell with any of you? Back in the Sermon on the Mount, do you remember Jesus saying something like that? Don't store up for yourself riches where moth can eat, where it can corrode and rot, but store up riches in heaven where it can't get at all that stuff. Here he is connecting with Jesus, but he's saying, your hoarding is one of the reasons that I'm rebuking you. You hang on to it, you hang on to it. You're not sharing, you're holding on to it. Jesus in Luke, the 12th chapter, has a great little parable and story. If you want to turn back to Luke chapter 12, he's being accosted by somebody who has a big question for him. They have an inheritance coming to them, and it's being debated with his brother, and he's asking Jesus about it. And Jesus tells the story of the rich fool in Luke chapter 12, verse 16. I think you probably know this pretty well. Let's just try to remember the story of the rich fool. There's a guy who has a lot of stuff. And he says, what am I going to do? I've got all these crops coming in. What am I going to do? What does he decide to do? Got too many crops coming in. I don't know where to store them all. I'm going to build more barns, build bigger barns. I'm going to put it in there. I'm going to store it more. I'm going to lay it up many years so that I can just take life easy, right? I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. Sit back. And Jesus says, yeah, you fool. You're a fool. Why does he call him a fool? I got a microphone. There's a microphone way back there. You gotta run. Raise your hand again, over off to your left. There you go.
He believed there was going to be a tomorrow in his life when Christ said, you don't know if you're going to have tomorrow. So, live it today. Well, he just said, I'm going to enjoy life tomorrow, but he didn't know if he was going to have it tomorrow.
You could be gone tomorrow, right? What did James say about life anyway in the 4th chapter? It's a mist. It's a vapor. It vanishes quickly. You're building all these barns. You're planning to eat, drink, be merry, and boom, you're a fool. It could be gone overnight. But he doesn't stop there. And here's what I think is even more important than just that he's going to die. In verse 20, when God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you," then he says, "Who will get what you've prepared for yourself?" You've lived your whole life for yourself, and your life is going to be gone. You've got this whole life wrapped around yourself, and then what? Who gets it? This is how, in verse 21, this is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, herself, but is not rich toward God. Foolish. So when James is nailing this guy of the rich people for being hoarders, it's from Jesus' very voice that he's just saying you're gonna lose it all in no time when all your life is about yourself. It's that same theme that has gone through the whole 4th chapter. When it's all about you, when it's all about your pride, you're gonna lose it all. They've hoarded, he says, in the last days. What an interesting little phrase to throw on there. You've hoarded wealth in the last days. What's the last days? What does that mean? Anybody know? Last days. Does it mean the world's going to end immediately? Sorry? Old age, okay. When the Bible talks about the last days, it's like it's the last days of the calendar for God's timeline. It's not like it's a cyclical thing, it's a timeline. And there's a beginning, creation, and there's an ending. And from the point of Jesus' birth, death, resurrection, ascension, to the end is referred to as the last days. In Acts, and the day of Pentecost, in the last days, old men will dream dreams, young men will have visions, and young ladies will prophesy. And in the last days, and it's now is the time. Joel talked about it, but now is the time. In Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 1, he talks about the last days. These are the last days now. So from the time that Jesus left this earth till he comes back again are the last days. What wealth does to us is we never have a view of the last days. We think life's going to go on forever and ever and ever. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry, and I'm going to extend my life, and I'm going to be happy all my life, and it's just going to go on and on and on. And what wealth does, maybe more than anything else, is gets our focus off that life is a mist, it's a vapor, it vanishes so quickly. And when we lose sight of that, wealth becomes not just something that we have, it becomes our God. It becomes idolatry. It becomes, Jesus calls it mammon, like a monster. It's the money monster. You start to worship mammon instead of God. You start to worship this thing that consumes you, and you hang on to it instead of hanging on to God. And when you hoard in the last days, when you hang on to your riches instead of your God, as Jesus would say in that parable, you're a fool. You're going to weep and wail when you see what comes to you. Rough words. It's the prophet words, is it not? Then his second reason for giving this rebuke is in verse 4. Look, he says, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. And the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord. The cries have reached the ears of the Lord. This is why I'm rebuking you. You're cheating people. You're cheating the workers. You're cheating others. They're guilty of cheating others. And the cries of those who are being cheated have reached the ears of the Lord. There's one thing that James brings out more over and over again is God has a special place for the poor. He has a heart for the poor. And it's not only very evident in James' writing, but as he would go back through the Old Testament, you would see that. Remember in Ruth when they were doing the fields of harvest and God instructed them, just go over it once. Don't harvest everything, and leave some side pieces for those they can come and they could pick up the extras. They could take the extras for themselves, and they called it gleaning. You can glean what's left over for those who don't have a job, for those who can't afford it. And what James is saying is, you guys, this is what God has against you if you're cheating others from what they would deserve. We sometimes think everybody just kind of revolves around us, that if we can bilk somebody out of money, we've made a great business deal. And James says, be careful of that. Next verse. Verse 5, you've lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You fatten yourself in the day of slaughter. So they're guilty of self-indulgence. It's all about themselves. I've never been around a lot of livestock and everything, but what I understand is they feed them pretty well before slaughter. Fatten up the pig. Fatten up the turkey before Thanksgiving. And those who just keep on indulging and eating, it's like, don't you know it's going to end someday? You're just fattening yourself up for the slaughter. And then finally he says, in verse 6, you've condemned and murdered innocent men who are not opposing you. You've condemned the innocent. You've taken advantage of the innocent. James says that here's the rich people in chapter 2, verse 6. Why are you letting the rich people have the front row? Because they exploit you all the time. There are people that take advantage of the innocent. So, why does he rebuke them? They're guilty of hoarding, of cheating others, of self-indulgence, and of taking advantage of the innocent. Let's go back to the Christmas movies. Can you see the villains fitting in any of these areas? Who do we know that's a hoarder in those Christmas movies? Scrooge, definitely a hoarder. Anybody cheating or robbing others? Home Alone, all about robbing others as well. Self-indulgence. Anybody with self-indulgence? Probably all of them a little bit. Grinch, maybe, I don't know. Guilty of taking advantage of the innocent. The greatest Christmas movie ever, Die Hard. Remember, he goes into the Christmas party and he holds them hostage until he gets taken advantage of. Thank you. I knew there must be somebody out there. You know, I think what's interesting is we can so easily just say that's not relevant. And we can so easily say, James, what got into you? Did you eat some stuff that got you all fired up? I mean, good grief. And yet, really, that's all the Christmas movies and Christmas stories are saying the same thing. You who have a lot, that hoard it and don't share it during Christmas time especially, you who take advantage of others, you who rob others, you who are greedy and all that kind of thing. It's not only pointing it out, but it's like James is saying to us, I not only want the rich people to hear this, I want the believers to say and know, don't be that. It's so it's such a slippery slope to get there. It catches us without even us realizing it. And before long, we're treating other people not Christ-like, but what's in it for us. We're indulging ourselves, and we're hanging on to what we don't even need just because we can do it. Holding on, and we'll take advantage of innocent people. It's a huge, huge warning, not only to the rich, but to every one of us as well. How you doing? I'm a little worried about you tonight. That sugar's kind of kicked in on you, hadn't it? Are you ready to go on? Okay. Verse 7. Be patient then, brothers, until the Lord's coming. Be patient until the Lord's coming. So take it in context now with where we've been. It's not just, everybody needs to hear, be patient. It's not just, hey, here's a verse on patience. I'm glad we finally got to this because the person I'm sitting next to needs to hear about patience. It's not just that, but the context of it is coming out of oppression, coming out of injustice, coming out of those being treated unfairly. When you look around and it just grips you. And our world and our culture is filled with that. And especially to this early church group of people who are believers in Jesus, but they're probably poor people, and the rich people are just running roughshod over the whole place. James says, hold on just a minute, be patient. Be patient. It's an interesting word. It's a word that's two Greek words put together that might best be translated, often it's translated long-suffering, but it might be better translated long-tempered. Long-tempered. I'm not sure we know what long-tempered is, but we definitely know what short-tempered is, do we not? So it's the opposite of short-tempered. It's the opposite of blowing up like a volcano. Or it's the opposite of seeing all the injustice and just you can't control yourself and you be long-tempered here, he says. Be patient until the Lord's coming. In this reaction, in this response, he gives like three or four things that to guard against in the context of injustice or oppression or pain or suffering. And here they are. Let's read them through and then we'll come back to them. Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop and how patient he is for the autumn and spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against each other, brothers, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. And as you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So more than once, about 3 times, be patient, be patient, be patient. When things aren't going well, who do we have a tendency to be impatient with? I mean, when he says be patient, the opposite of that is don't be impatient. things aren't going well for you, or you see stuff that just gets to you, who are you impatient with? I hear you talking, but I don't hear you. Say it one more time. Your wife? Okay. Okay. Others, let's just say others. Yeah. The Lord. Yeah. What are you doing, God? Can't you see this? Don't you know what's going on? I mean, here I am on earth, and I see all this stuff happening. I see rich people exploiting others. I see the innocent being taken advantage of. I see that people who are working hard aren't getting their just due. God, don't you see it? Open your eye. Are you just up there? Are you sleeping? You don't care? Come on. And if you're going to do something, when are you going to do it? Because I would have done something a lot sooner. It's easy to get impatient with God, especially if you're in that category. If you're one of the innocent ones being taken advantage of. If you're one of the persons that is being oppressed or you're suffering, God, where are you? If you're in pain, God, are you going to do something? I mean, we're praying, people are praying for me, and I'm praying for myself. Come on. Come on. Anybody ever get impatient with God? Isn't it just crazy how his timeline is so much different than ours? His response time is so much different than ours. James says, hold on just a minute. Be patient. Be patient. Wait. What? And then he gives the example of farmers. I'm not a farmer. I read what this is saying, but see how the farmer waits for the Lord to yield its valuable crop and how patient he is. What can we learn from farmers? I have trouble with my winter grass even. I can't even wait for that. And we have fed every pigeon in our neighborhood to the point of they can't fly anymore. They just walk in, they knock on the gate, and then they come on in. What can we learn from the farmers? There we go with the microphone. Good job.
I think we can learn patience, of course, and then that you get good seed in the ground, gets good crop, and you have a great harvest.
Okay. So what do we learn? What do we learn about patience from that? The seeds in the ground, we get a good crop.
We learned that it's good.
That takes some time.
It takes time, and it takes patience, and it takes trusting the process, and it takes, you read your manual or whatever you needed to read to learn about what you needed to do to plant those seeds and get the crop that you wanted to get.
Yeah.
That in return, you're trusting that it's going to be good.
Great. Any other great insight from farmers? Back over the corner here.
I believe that farmers work also for what they harvest. They don't just sit there and hope that everything will end up okay. They put effort into it. So I don't think I've ever met a lazy farmer.
That's great. There's no such thing as a lazy farmer. Somebody else, what do we learn from farmers about patience? Faith? What do you mean by faith? Okay. Say that last part again on the microphone. That was good.
So as farmers rely on the hope that their crop is going to produce fruit. That builds faith that every year that they persevere and they push forward, their faith gets stronger in the Lord when they see their crops producing. So every year that they wait, they have the hope that it's going to produce, and they persevere with the faith that they have.
They know from the previous year that God came through, even though they wondered what was happening. Hindsight is 2020, isn't it? It's just hard to see forward. Anybody else? Any great insights from the farmers? You ever plant anything, and then pull it out and pick it up and look at it and see how it's growing once it sprouts up a little bit? Or you dig in and start looking at the seed to make sure it's growing? It doesn't help it grow very much, does it? To let it just sit there and germinate and to take the seed, take root, and to grow, that God is doing something in that seed even when we don't see it. And even when we don't think anything's happening. And we think maybe it's not going to ever come up. But God's doing something in a process that takes longer than what we expect to make that thing happen. Some of you right now are in that situation. You're in a place where you just think God's forgot about you. Or at least you're not very high in the priority list. And you'd think he's not doing anything. And yet, in the waiting time, he's doing some of his best work in you. He's doing something in you that the fruit and the harvest is going to be much better because of the waiting time. And it's hard to be patient. It's hard to be patient. But we learn from them. The rains come in the autumn, rains come in the spring, and God starts to do something. So be patient, he's telling these people, and he's telling us. And then his next thing is there in verse 8, stand firm. Stand firm. Be patient, stand firm. Literally, it's don't be faint-hearted. It's establish your heart, the old King James Version says. Not only be patient during this time, but establish your heart. Stand firm. Don't lose heart. I don't know about you, but when there's tough times or things I don't understand, not only do I lose heart, and not only do I get discouraged, but I get to the point where I get weary. It's like, I can't go on. Can't go on any further. How much longer do I need to wait? And to be able to recognize that it's on the other end of this thing, if I can just stand firm, stand strong. Uncertainty is one of our biggest enemies. For instance, if you go to a doctor and the doctor gives you a report that you don't want to hear, and you don't know if you're going to make it or not, and you don't know if you can get through all the pain and all the treatment and all the money and it's easy to get faint-hearted. It's easy to get weary. It's easy to lose heart and to not stand firm. But if you could go to a doctor and they told you, here's your report, here's what you got to go through, here's the procedures we're going to do, here's the process that you're going to go through, here's even the pain that you're going to face, but I guarantee you, in 6 months, you're going to be completely better and you're going to have 100 years life guaranteed. We would say, yeah, okay. I mean, I'm not looking forward to all that stuff I have to go through and all the pain, but if I'm guaranteed on the other side, I'm going to be okay, I'm there. Sign me up. I can do it. I can make through. I can stand firm. I can wait. I can be patient. And James says, stand firm, strong heart, establish your heart, wait, be patient. The Lord's coming again. The Lord's coming. There's hope on the other side of this. The Lord's coming. So we're at a time in the Christmas season. Churches have a name for Christmas season. Anybody want to see how liturgical you are? This is the season of Advent. What does Advent mean? Christmas time. Christmas time. What does Advent mean?
I believe it's preparing for the coming of the Lord.
Okay, prepare the Lord's coming. Has the Lord already come? Isn't that kind of what Christmas is about? The Lord's come? The answer, yes. This is just news to you? Here, Christmas is about Jesus has come. So what are we preparing? That he's coming again? You ever put that in your Advent prayers, thoughts? That in the Old Testament, all those scriptures that talk about, hey, Jesus is coming, the birth is coming, the Messiah is coming, the chosen one is coming, the anointed one is coming. All those prophecies, the anticipation, the advent of Jesus comes. And now in the New Testament church, it's, hey, he's coming again. He's coming again. Paul used to go around saying, Maranatha, Maranatha, Lord, come quickly. Come again. Why? Are you weird, Paul? Why are you going around saying that? Don't you like living here? No, because when I understand the Lord's coming again, I can be patient. I can wait. I can stand firm, according to James. Paul talks the same way. There's something about it. So here's what Advent is for me, and kind of bouncing out of that, and I hope for you. It's recognizing the wonder of the Lord coming the first time. The awe and the splendor and the beauty of Jesus coming again. I never tire of hearing, and even more so as a pastor, I never tire of telling the story of Christmas. I love the wise men, I love the shepherds and the angels and the carols and in wonder and awe. It is the most amazing story. And Advent brings me to that point of wonder and worship. But I've served him long enough to know, and I've been around long enough to know also, he comes now. He comes today. He comes in the year 2018. And he intersperses our life with his holy presence. And I watch for that. I watch for God moments. He comes in just enough to remind me, I can wait a little longer. He comes in just enough to remind us, stand firm, take heart. You ever have any of those only God moments when he does something in your church, or he does something in your life or your family, and it's, whoa, God. Unbelievable. I mean, you're going along and along and along and along, and boom. I mean, last week, you guys talking about the will of God and finding the will of God, and all of a sudden how God comes in and just, bang, he hits us. Here is the will. Here's what I want you to do. We watch for that in the splendor of that. But we wait for his second coming. We wait knowing he's coming again. We wait with firmness, strength in our heart, and even patience. Because I know on the other end of that, it's going to be all right. It's going to be good, in fact. And so he starts to give us some illustrations of that in verse 10. Brothers, as an example of patience in suffering, in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You've heard of Job's perseverance. See what the Lord's finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. You've heard about that before. Now, hang on to it. What do you know about the prophets? When he says the prophets have had patience in the face of suffering. Do you know any prophet stories in the Old Testament prophets? This is really going to test you now. You could go to any prophet in the Old Testament and find them suffering and having patience. Anybody know any stories of Old Testament prophets? Jeremiah. What do we know about Jeremiah? What was his nickname? The weeping prophet. Weeping. And how would you like to be known as that? Every time you walk in the door, here comes Joe. Here's weeping Joe coming in. You know, people got tired of hearing him weep and wail and moan as he brought the word of God. And so they finally decided, here's one thing we can do with him. There was a cistern, like big old like oil drum, if you will, that had water. Usually it would have water in it. No water in this one. They'd throw him in the bottom of the cistern, which had to be a long drop, and they left him there to starve to death. Just die. We're tired of hearing of you, prophet Jeremiah. I'm a prophet of God. You know, nobody listened. But he hung in there, and they finally pulled him out in the face of suffering. I'd get out of there and go, God, do you remember you called me to be a prophet? Do you remember that? How come? This is the way you treat prophets? I'd rather get a job in the bank or something, you know. I'd rather sell insurance. I don't want to be a prophet anymore. This is how you treat us. You know any other prophet stories? Micah? What did you say? Elijah. What do we know about Elijah? Where's the microphone guy? Jezebel was a mean, nasty old woman. Hold your hand up there and tell. There it is, right?
Is mic off? There you go. So she had said Elijah and Jezebel and the prophets of Baal. So he had to be patient while there was a period with no rain in Israel,
All right.
waiting for the little stream to dry up.
Yeah, he had to wait out. Yeah, exactly. I mean, story after story of suffering and God coming through and God coming through and God coming through. We go through the prophets all day. Everyone. Ezekiel, God says to Ezekiel, I'm going to take the light of your eyes away. Talking about his wife. His wife died. Take the delight of your eyes. That's what I'm going to take the delight of your eyes away from you. And he had to deal with that, the loss of a loved one, loss of his wife. Face of suffering. And then old Job, and Job's persevering. What do you know about Job? Let's look at Job real quick. My clock's gone away, but I think I've got some time. Go back to Job real quick. Job was right before Psalms. He didn't have good friends. He's the guy that he probably wished God would say, hey, I'm taking your wife away. That would have been a good thing for Job, wouldn't it? She was not the most encouraging person. Job 1, one thing after the other starts happening to him. Satan is testing him and questioning the Lord whether, you know, if you take your hands off him, he's not going to serve you. And the Lord says, well, you can do anything you want to him, just don't lay a finger on him. And one day his sons and daughters are feasting and drinking. Oldest brother comes up and a messenger comes and says, the oxen you're plowing, the donkeys are grazing nearby. They were attacked by the enemy, carried them off, they're gone. While that guy was speaking, another messenger comes and says, hey, the fire of God fell from the sky and burned up the sheep and all your servants. I'm the only one left to tell you. While he's still speaking, here comes another messenger, comes and says, hey, a raiding party came in and they carried off your camels. And they put those servants to the sword. I'm the only one left of that group. While he's still speaking, here comes another guy. Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking at that party early on. Yeah, a tornado came. They're done. They're all gone. House collapsed on them. He just goes one thing after the other. In verse 20, he fell to the ground in worship and said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will depart. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with the wrongdoing. Wow. Wow. All that happening, he falls on the ground and worships. Talk about perseverance and patience, long suffering. Chapter 2, things are still going bad for him, and his wife comes up to him in verse 9. You still holding on to your integrity, Job? Curse God and die. And he replied, you're talking like a foolish woman. Should we not accept good from God and not trouble? And all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Chapter 13, verse 15, he says, though God would slay me, I will hope in him. I will continually put my hope in him. Then at the end of the book, in chapter 42, he says in verse 5, my ears have heard of you, but my eyes now have seen you. I've heard of you, God, but now I see you. I despise myself. I repent in dust and ashes. And that chapter ends with God making him prosperous once again, not only giving him back what he lost, but doubling it, prospering him twice as much. And James says, hey, patience and strength and stand strong, stand firm. Remember Job? You've heard of Job's perseverance, and you've seen what the Lord finally brought about. You see how the Lord restored everything and doubled it? Let me just tell you, the Lord is full of compassion and mercy. He's full of compassion and mercy. When you're facing tough times and you're feeling or seeing injustice or oppression and you're wondering where God is and you don't know what's going on, remember the farmers. Wait, God's working. Remember the prophets who held in there no matter what. Remember Job. Because you know how it ends? God's mercy and compassion come to the front. How do I know that's going to happen? When is that going to happen? God, you're not on my timeline. James says, know this. I can't tell you when it's going to happen. I know he came the first time. I know he at times interjects himself into our life right now. But this I know for certain. He's coming again. He's coming again. And his mercy and compassion will make it all better again. He'll redeem the pain. He'll redeem the injustice and the oppression. Those who have been in pain, those who have been broken, those who have been through Jesus Christ, he comes again and he redeems it all. He makes it worthwhile. So be patient. Hang in there. Persevere. Stand firm. Don't lose heart. Don't grumble, he says. It's so easy to grumble. Don't moan and grumble. Just keep at it. Let me just throw you one more scripture if you got a second. Turn back to the book of Hebrews, which is just the book right before James, the 10th chapter of Hebrews. Listen to the writer of Hebrews. Chapter 10, verse 35. He says this, so don't throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to persevere so that when you've done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. For in just a little while, and he starts quoting back from the Old Testament book of Habakkuk, for in just a little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back. We are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed. We are those who believe and are saved. That's us. And you know what? That's Christmas. That's Christmas. So, we'll pick up on verse 12 later. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would come quickly. This Christmas season, as we spend some time in wonder and awe of you coming the first time, I pray that you would visit every home and every house, every family, every individual here tonight. As we break your word, that you would raise us up to be able to stand firm, strengthen our heart, and where need be, help us be patient and wait. But give us a glimpse, give us just a glimpse of your presence this Christmas. Just enough to get through, just enough to get on the other side, just enough to hold on until you come again and redeem it all. So while we enjoy this life and we enjoy these moments, we anticipate one day with you, with all the angels, with all those who have gone on before us, we'll be together as your church, your bride. We'll be celebrating not only a Christmas celebration, but we will be celebrating in the presence of the King, King Jesus. We pray all this in his name. And everyone said, amen.